But Elendil did all his father had bidden, and his ships lay off the east coast of the land. And the faithful put aboard their wives and their children, and their heirlooms, and great stores of goods. Many things there were of beauty and power, such as the Númenóreans had contrived in the days of their wisdom, vessels and jewels, and scrolls of lore written in scarlet and black, and 7 stones they had, the gift of the Eldar. But in the ship of Isildur was guarded the young tree, the scion of Nimloth the Fair.
Hey there, guys. Welcome back to Keep On Tolkien. I'm Joel N.
And I'm Danny J.
And today we are coming at you with part 2 of our new 3-part series, the High Kings series.
Yeah, High Kings, just like us. They high. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, this is one of my favorite characters. I love this dude.
Yeah, I'd say this is one of the really important High Kings. This is one of the first times we've covered a High King of the Dúnedain, right?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we're doing 2 right in a row. Look at that.
Right in a row.
Right
Knock
in a
them
row.
out.
Knock them out. But yeah, today we're talking about Elendil the Tall.
Yeah, so let's start off generally with just some titles for Elendil. So the name Elendil literally means admirer of stars,
which actually signifies the elf friend to the Edain. So we were talking about this earlier in languages, like how you'd say, we were talking about some negative ones, but could we talk about a positive one?
Yeah, it's more or less using slang or idioms, or basically.
Yeah, like an idiom. Yeah, like we were talking about like house of ill repute. Like that just means a bad reputation house, but really that means a brothel, right? So it's like, it's a word that means another word. So it literally means admirer of stars, but to an Edain person, that would mean you are an elf.
That signifies you're an elf friend.
An elf friend.
Because elves are admirers of the stars.
Yes, exactly. They're the children of the stars, right? And we got a fun Adunaic word for elf friend. What is that, Joel?
I'm going to try it. It's Nimruzir.
That's how I'd say it, yeah. Nimruzir.
Yeah, so that's just an Adunaic version of the same. Admirer of the stars.
Elendil is also known as the Faithful, Elendil the Tall, Elendil the Fair, and there's a cool Quenya word for that. What's that, Joel?
It is Voromden.
Hell yeah.
A couple other titles for him is the Faithful, Lord of Endunier, and High King of the Dúnedain in Exile.
Before we get right into the Elendil business, we're going to kind of give you some context for Elendil and like where he fit in Númenórean history and society. So let's get a little bit into Elendil's lineage.
Yeah, so let's start off with the Lords of Endunier. We should probably clarify these guys, because we haven't talked too much about them.
Right, it's a specific group of Númenóreans, and they are of the line of Elros, but they are not of the line of kings.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So Elendil and his family, they are the 21st generation in this?
They're 21 generations removed from Elros.
Okay.
Yes. So this distinction actually occurs, it has a little bit of a kerfuffle with the laws of what do you call it, where you pass down the throne?
Lineage
laws? Yeah, I don't Sure. Well, the lineage laws, there's a little kerfuffle. So this distinction takes place during the reign of Tar Elendil, who that sounds familiar, right? Ancestor of our guy Elendil. Tar Elendil is the 4th king of Númenor, and he lived from Second Age 350 to Second Age 751, and he was 401 years old.
Yeah, his reign lasted from 590 to 740, but ultimately, Tar Elendil was a lore master, and he recorded many things in books. He was a pretty learned man.
Yeah, learned man. And he has the coolest nickname I've ever heard. I want this as my own nickname. He was called Paramite, which means the book-handed in Quenya. That would have been
always got a book in hand.
12-year-old me, yeah.
So his oldest child was a girl whose name was Silmarion, And Tar Elendil, he thought that she should get the scepter and rule after him.
But unfortunately, this was forbidden by Númenorian law at the time. It was later changed, but at this juncture, it was illegal.
Yeah, because it always went down to the son, not the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, Iruman, his son, who was his second child.
His third child. There's
third?
There's a daughter in between.
Oh my God.
Yep.
So they skipped both
They skipped two girls.
Well,
to
that's
go
a
to
pretty big
yeah,
slap
isn't
in the
it?
face.
Yeah.
Yeah, so his third child, Irman, his son, ended up being named the heir and ruled as Tar Meneldur. You may recognize that from past Dúnedain episodes.
Yeah, that's Eldarion's dad.
He's the fifth king of Númenor.
And he reigned from Second Age 740 to 883.
Yeah, but ultimately, because of this sexist bullshit, Tar Elendil created a new title for Silmarion's descendants and split up the heirlooms of the kingdom. So since she wasn't able to become ruler like he thought she deserved, he made basically a special house for her and her descendants.
Yeah.
And this is where we get Elendil's line from.
Yeah,
and that's why they're not technically of the line of kings of Númenor.
If the laws were different,
if the laws were different,
yeah. It's super lame actually if you think about it. But yes, so these heirlooms that they split up. So Ruth, the Sword of Thingol, that went to the king,
mm-hmm.
and then several other artifacts. But the ones that Silmarion's descendants, the Lords of Endunier, inherited were my favorite artifact, the Ring of Barahir, the Sword Narsil, forged by Telkar in the First Age.
Also the Scepter of Annúminas, which is the symbol of the rule of Endunier. And also the Elendilmere of the West.
Right, and that's that Star of Elendil, they call that. We'll get into that. It's a very important artifact. We'll get into it later.
So the Lords of Endunier were ultimately the rulers of the western side of Númenor, and that part of the island was known as Andistar. And in Andistar, the ruling city became known as Endunier.
Valandil, the son of Silmarion, he became the first Lord of Endunier. And he and all the Lords of Endunier were known for their close relationship with the Eldar of Tol Eressëa.
They were gifted the Palantiri by the Eldar. These also became an heirloom of the Lords of Endunier, as we'll talk about a little bit later.
And they were the highest of all the Lords of Númenor. And they were on what was called the Council of the Scepter, which was like the court of the king, essentially. And they were very highly trusted advisors of the king. The most trusted until something happens later on.
So we've got a quick excerpt here about the Lords of Endunier. Highest in honor after the house of the kings were the Lords of Endunier, for they were of the line of Elros, descendant from Silmarion, daughter of Tar Elendil, the fourth king of Númenor. And these lords were loyal to the kings, and revered them. And the Lord of Endunier was ever among the chief counselors of the king.
All right, so now we know a little bit of the lineage of Elendil. Let's get right into him.
Yeah. Origins, Elendil the Tall.
Yeah. So he's born in Second Age 3119, and he's the son of Amandil, who is the 18th Lord of Endunier. So we're 18 generations removed from Valandil.
And like so many other characters in Tolkien's Legendarium, his mother is unnamed.
Yeah, I love how he's a super, super important character.
Super important. His father and like all the other rulers are important, but his mother didn't deserve a name, I guess. Or perhaps it's listed elsewhere in like maybe the histories of Middle-earth, but at least not in the material we saw.
No. But he is actually named after his forefather, Tar Elendil, who we talked about earlier.
Right. Two different Elendils. One was king of Númenor, one not.
And his father, Amandil, who was actually old friends with the last king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, which we'll get into a little bit later. You might recognize that name.
Yeah, so that'll be a pretty important point later on in our story today. But he was also known as Elendil the Tall, as we've mentioned a couple times now, because he was the tallest of the Dúnedain who escaped the downfall of Númenor. He was apparently just shy of 8 feet.
Yeah. I saw everywhere I was seeing it said 7'11", which I thought was like too accurate. So I was just
like 7'11" inches. That's empirical.
Yeah, it's weird. So I was just like,
I don't think Tolkien used the empirical.
I don't think so either. But so just shy of 8 feet tall. And his name, as we said, means elf friend, or literally translated, admirer of stars.
Yeah, so now this is a part we're going to get into the part of Elendil's life where we got to talk about the faithful versus the kingsmen.
Right. Yeah. There's these two. I guess you could call them political parties, but
kind of.
Yeah, it gets a little dirty, but yeah,
it's just a little. It's kind of religious based, but aren't a lot of political parties,
aren't they?
Yeah. But so ultimately, in the later part of the history of the island of Numenor, the culture takes a turn and it shifts away from the friendship with the Eldar and kind of turns towards, it turns away from the Eldar and the Valar entirely.
Yeah, and this is when they really, because, well, what happens is Numenor becomes so great and so powerful that they don't want to die. There's like, this is so great, I want it to last forever. So, like, the culture itself starts to yearn for immortality.
Yeah, especially with all their interactions with the immortal elves, they start to become jealous.
And they literally live within sight of the Undying Lands, yeah. And so here's a little excerpt about that. Now this yearning grew ever greater with the years, and the Númenóreans began to hunger for the undying city that they saw from afar, and the desire of everlasting life, to escape from death and the ending of delight, grew strong upon them. And ever as their power and glory grew, greater their unquiet increased.
Thus it was that a shadow fell upon them, in which maybe the will of Morgoth was at work that still moved in the world, and the Númenóreans began to murmur, at first in their hearts and then in open words, against the doom of men, and most of all against the ban which forbade them to sail into the west.
Yeah, and these feelings within the culture grew so pervasive that within Numenor that by the reign of Tar-Atanamir, and his reign was from 2029 to 2221 Second Age, and he's the 12th king. But he's openly speaking against the ban of the Valar in public.
Yeah, so that's the significance of the 12th king. Tar-Atanamir, yeah, he starts speaking against the ban openly. Which is pretty, it's pretty big.
It's big, yeah.
And under his son, Tar and Calaman, and he was the 13th king, this is when Numenor really starts to split into two factions, the King's Men and the Faithful.
There were some who remained true to the old ways of Numenor, and they were called the Faithful, or the Elendili, the elf friends. And they were secretly led by the lords of Dúnedain on the sly.
We've got an excerpt about this here. Yet also from the beginning they bore a special love to the Eldar and reverence for the Valar, and as the shadow grew they aided the faithful as they could. But for long they did not declare themselves openly, and sought rather to amend the hearts of the lords of the scepter with wiser counsels.
Yeah, so they tried to like kind of use their power and influence to make it easier for the faithful rather than outright rebel against the rest of the country.
Right, yeah. They tried to go about the way of just providing safer counsels.
Diplomacy. Yeah, diplomacy. Yeah, and the faithful were in the vast minority.
Yeah, the larger group were the King's Men.
And these guys, they shunned the Valar and everything about the Eldar.
Yeah, and it got to the point where eventually the kings themselves, the kings of Numenor, start to name themselves in Adonaic rather than Quenya, which is traditional.
And the first guy to do that was the 18th king, Ar-Belzegar, and he was from Second Age 2737 to 2835.
Yeah, eventually the Elven tongue was banned and the Eldar of Tol Eressëa visited only in secret. Things got pretty hostile against the elves. The lords of Andúnië, they harbored and aided these elves that were secretly sailing over from Tol Eressëa.
Yeah, and that was really during the reign of Ar-Adunacor. But eventually, under Ar-Gimilzor, the faithful are actually openly persecuted.
Yeah, so this is when things take another turn for the worst.
So this is pretty much the setting. That whole bit that we just did, I don't know how long that was, but all that is to set up Elendil in the culture, in the air, the zeitgeist of Numenor.
Yeah, so we've kind of talked on who the Lords of Andúnië are, and we've kind of talked about the state of Numenor and how things are splitting right now and kind of turning away. And yeah, now we're going to get to basically the worst of the worst.
Exactly.
So to really understand Elendil better, next we'll have to talk about his father Amandil and the final king of Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn.
Yeah. So by the time of Elendil, the faithful, they started to gather on the eastern port of Romania because a lot of them were actually getting out of Numenor and going to live in Middle-earth.
Right, yeah, like we mentioned, things were obviously getting, they were getting persecuted more or less.
Yeah.
So, and none of the king's men were against the faithful leaving. They were just kind of like, yeah, go ahead.
Good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance. We'll keep Numenor. You can go back to Middle-earth.
Yeah, more for us.
Yeah, so at this time, some of the faithful had been leaving.
And at this time, Amandil was the Lord of Dúnedain, and together with his sons, with his son Elendil and and Elendil's sons, Isildur and Anarion, they aided the secret exodus and generally helped the faithful in any way that they could.
Now, their father Amandil, when he was a child, he was actually childhood friends with the last king of Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn, or I guess you just call him Pharazôn at the time.
No, that was just shorthand. No, it's still Ar-Pharazôn. I forget what his name, his
previously
pre-name was. I read it earlier and I didn't put it down there. See, you're just poking holes in my outline. Fuck you, Joel.
I'm sorry.
Fuck you, man.
That's my mistake. But ultimately, since these two were old childhood friends, this is probably why Amandil was allowed to remain on the Council of the Scepter, despite the fact that Ar-Pharazôn was very much part of the Kingsmen. So these two friends are completely different factions at a point in time when the factions are about as split as they've ever been.
As they possibly can be.
So it wouldn't really make much sense for him to be on the Council otherwise. So this actually made this story... It made it make more sense for me. I didn't know that they were childhood friends previously.
I didn't know that either. I was always just like, why doesn't Ar-Pharazôn just kill the Lords of Dúnedain? Like, I don't understand. Why don't you just come after Amandil? But that's why, because he's good friends with them.
They're actually childhood friends, that's a pretty cool story twist.
Yeah. Then Pharazôn married his cousin forcefully and usurped the throne of Numenor.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different story, though.
Yeah, that's a different story. That's a different episode.
We call it the Cousin Fuckers episode.
We're going to have to make that now.
Yeah, now we're going to have to make a Cousin Fuckers episode.
The long promised Cousin Fuckers episode.
It's just him and Maeglin.
I think there was at least one other Dúnedain king. It might have been during the Exile Kingdoms. I don't know. Anyway, off track.
Yeah, off track. It happens.
All right, so at this point in Numenor, things are pretty bad with these two factions, but things get even worse when Sauron is introduced, and he is brought back to Numenor as a prisoner in Second Age 3262.
And all of the Council of the Scepter, except Amandil, are eventually swayed by Sauron and fall under his influence. Amandil just straight up leaves the council when Sauron eventually just becomes chief advisor to the king.
Yeah, he's like, I'm done. We're done here. I can't
do this.
Yeah, Ar-Pharazôn essentially chooses Sauron over one of his oldest and dearest friends. Like, that's got to be
That's shitty.
That's got to be pretty shitty. Like, they've lasted through everything up until now.
I'd be pissed if you chose Sauron over me, Joel.
I'd be pretty fucking pissed too.
Yeah, what if you Sauron? One day you just come in, we come here to a podcast, and Sauron is standing next to me.
Ooh.
We've thought of some new directions for the podcast
that don't include you.
That don't include you, Joel. Sauron here thinks that I deserve the glory. Yeah, no, Sauron's a prick. He always does that shit.
Mm-hmm. So at the time of Sauron's arrival, the Númenóreans did not love the Valar, but they still at least feared them.
Yeah,
they weren't about to act out against them.
But Sauron moves in and says, "Hey, why not try Melkor?"
Oh.
It was really funny. We were talking about this earlier. Sauron, he's like that guy that's always trying to hang out with girls when they're fighting with their boyfriends. Like always, just like. Yeah. Oh, that's too bad he treats you that way. You deserve so much better.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you just come over to my house and we'll watch Netflix and, Yeah.
Netflix and chill.
Yeah, that's Sauron.
God damn it, Sauron.
The slimy one.
So Sauron eventually convinces Ar-Pharazôn that Melkor is a champion for men.
Yeah, he kind of claims that the Valar are trying to keep the men down. They favor the Eldar, and that Melkor was the only one that was like, no, stop,
Men. Yeah, claiming that Melkor is the only one favoring men.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sauron also told them that through Melkor they could gain immortality, which is absolutely...
Not true.
Not true. Not at all.
But this is when the Lords of Dúnedain decide that they can't do this diplomacy shit anymore, and they need to be a little bit more direct.
Yeah, this is when things get a little more direct. They're not just kind of stand by. So eventually, Sauron tries to convince Ar-Pharazôn to cut down the White Tree, and the king initially refuses. But word reaches Amandil, and he is obviously not down for this. And we've got an excerpt about this.
But when Amandil heard rumor of the evil purpose of Sauron, he was grieved to the heart, knowing that in the end Sauron would surely have his will. Then he spoke to Elendil and the sons of Elendil, recalling the tale of the trees of Valinor, and Isildur said no word, but went out and did a deed for which he was afterwards renowned.
Said no word.
Said no word, cool as a cucumber, just left the room.
He knew what he had to do.
He knew what he had to do. And he does some really cool, badass shit. But turns out, guys, next week is a fucking Isildur episode. So we're going to talk more about that next week.
Yeah, so through much badassery, Isildur goes and recovers a fruit from the tree before it gets cut down. And, so next week's episode, we'll be talking more about that when we cover Isildur himself, the next High King. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Choo, 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 choo.
But like we mentioned, eventually the king does give in to Sauron, and the white tree is cut down and burned. It's actually shortly after Isildur steals that fruit.
It's pretty much in reaction to that, which I was kind of thinking earlier, like maybe would have been better if he never did that in the first place.
Maybe it wouldn't have burned the tree.
Yeah, I was maybe that was a self-fulfilling
Sauron probably would
prophecy.
have gotten to it eventually, though.
Yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, they were basically like, what? Somebody stole the fruit? Chop that shit down and burn it now.
Yeah, so if you want to hear anything more about that or some of those other events, go ahead and go back to episode 22, Kingdoms of the Dúnedain, Númenor. But ultimately, cutting down the tree and burning it signifies the final turn away from the original promise of Númenor. And although the people of Númenor were not happy, they grew to their greatest height and their greatest power after all this happens.
And Sauron actually convinces Ar-Pharazôn that they are now mighty enough to move against the Valar.
Yeah, the fucking Valar themselves.
You are now mighty enough to take the gods.
Yeah, so when Elendil hears this, he calls his family together to tell them his new plan, because, this is obviously fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, sidebar, everybody come over here.
Okay, so he plans to sail to Valinor himself and warn the Valar of the king's folly. And he kind of likens his voyage to Elendil of old,
Yeah, which is actually his ancestor.
His ancestor, yeah. And initially, Elendil is not super on board with this.
Here's a little excerpt from the Alcalabeth about that.
Would you betray the king? Said Elendil. For you know well the charge that they make against us, that we are traitors and spies, and that until this day it has been false.
If I thought that Manwë needed such a messenger, said Elendil, I would betray the king.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Stark terms there.
That goes on for quite a bit, too. I had to cut that. But it goes on for... Yeah, he straight up says, like, this is a higher duty than my loyalty to the king. Is his loyalty to my god, essentially.
Yeah, initially Elendil is like, all this talk of us being traitors and stuff has been false up until now.
Yeah,
Are you sure you want to go through this? Like, this is a pretty big deal.
I love that. Up until now, it's been not true.
So ultimately, Elendil is not too pleased with this plan because he feels that his father is abandoning his people in their time of need. But his father still, says that this is the right thing to do, and he urges Elendil to take some precautions lest shit should hit the fan.
Lest shit should hit the fan.
And we have an excerpt about this as well.
I counsel that you should prepare yourselves other ships, and put aboard all such things as your hearts cannot bear to part with. And when the ships are ready, you should lie in the haven of Romena. Yeah, and he basically tells them, like, if anybody asks, these ships are to follow me, because I'm going to sail off.
Oh.
And he says that, he sails off in a different direction. Elendil says, I'm going to sail north or south, and then turn around and go west.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so Isildur's just supposed to tell the Númenorians that all these ships are to follow Elendil.
Who is going east.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Elendil prepares these 9 ships and fills them with the faithful and their families and the heirlooms of their house.
Which brings us back to, hey, the opening excerpt, right? So some of the cool heirlooms of the house that they took. Narsil, which Elendil carried on him as his sword. Elendilmir of the West, the Scepter of Anúminas.
The Ring of Barahir, the 7 Palantiri, or Seeing Stones, and the Seedling of Nimloth. So now that the Lords of Andúnië are all prepared, let's get into the downfall itself, also known as...
the Alcalabeth.
Is it Alcalabeth or Acalab?
I don't know. Do I mispronounce it? I always think it's Alcalabeth.
Alcala. I guess it's potato. Fuck
somebody's
me.
outside. Somebody's out there yelling at us. We're both saying it wrong. But yeah, after Elendil leaves some wild ass shit starts happening in Numenor. Like lightning is indiscriminately killing people. Huge likenesses of eagles are appearing in the sky. For more on this, see episode 22, which is our Numenor episode.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ominous signs going on right now, like pretty obvious shit.
I love the lightning indiscriminately killing people.
Yeah, just like in the street. Just
it says in the street, in the fields, and in the mountains. Like it's everywhere. Just
everywhere. So eventually, Ar-Pharazôn sails the great armament to invade the Undying Lands. He's going to do it.
He's going to do it.
And this ultimately triggers the wrath of Iluvatar himself. And Iluvatar brings down the coastal mountains of Valar, because they did make it there.
Oh, yeah.
And he traps the Númenórean fleet in what is known as the Caves of the Forgotten.
He also gets real pissed off and just straight up sinks the island of Numenor. And Elendil and his 9 ships, they escape just in time.
Right, yeah, because they had those 9 ships off the east coast. So when the island is sunk and destroyed, they are barely saved, but they are saved because it's pretty violent.
It is violent. And the violent turbulence of the ocean actually plays into a little bit of history here, which we're about to get into. So they decide they're going to go to Middle-earth. Where else? They can't go to the Undying Lands. Let's go to Middle-earth. So they actually encounter massive waves and storms on the way over there, and the ships are split up.
Elendil is swept north into the Gulf of Lune, and Anarion and Isildur, his sons, are swept south and eventually find the mouth of Anduin.
Yeah. So we basically split up our immigrant group into 2 different parts.
So Elendil lands in Middle-earth in the year 3320, and as he lands, he swears an oath in the High Elven tongue of Quenya. You want to go for this one, Danny?
Yeah. Et Aerello Endorena Utulian Sinome Maruvan Ar Hildiniar Ten Ambarmeta.
Translation?
Out of the great sea to Middle-earth I am come. In this place I will abide, and my heirs, until the ending of the world.
Which is a pretty fucking badass thing to just declare.
Yeah, and this is actually what's known as the Oath of Elendil. And this is one of the telling moments of why Elendil's a great leader. And it's the humility he shows in this moment here. I mean, he's coming with all these, like, super cool shit and, like, tall, scary guys from the West.
Yeah, they're still pretty powerful.
Yeah, and he's coming as a refugee, and he's acknowledging that. And he's really just kind of happy that he was spared, and his people were spared. And this is him adopting Middle-earth as his home and pledging to protect it until the end of the world.
It is pretty beautiful.
Yeah, Elendil's great.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like we had mentioned earlier, at this point, some of the faithful had been leaving Numenor for some time before the fall. So there were actually already some of the faithful already there when they arrived. So after he lands, in Eriador, Elendil meets High King Gil-galad of the Noldorian Elves.
And Gil-galad acknowledges the friendship of the Númenóreans of old.
Yeah, he welcomes Elendil and his company, and they form a strong alliance with the Elves of Eriador.
And basically through the grace of Gil-galad, he's allowed to establish his kingdom there.
Right, because the first kingdom that we're about to talk about, Arnor, in the north, that's very close to his kingdom.
Yeah.
In Lindon, right?
Yeah, and Gil-galad, he's got all these Númenóreans already living underneath him. So he's like, yeah, I mean, these are your people, go lead them.
Might as well.
So Elendil establishes the North Kingdom of Arnor in Second Age 3320.
Yeah, so some of those Númenóreans that had come to Middle-earth previously, they're now part of these the Northern Kingdom. And these Dúnedain there, they began to mingle with some of the middlemen, some of the Edain of Middle-earth.
Yeah, so the bloodline's being diluted a little bit.
Yeah, so this is the main population of the Northern Kingdom, where some of these mixed folk.
Yeah, and still Dúnedain blood, but yeah.
Still Dúnedain blood.
Elendil founded the city of Annúminas in that same year, 3320, and ruled from there. There were also several other famous cities in the Northern Kingdom. What are some of those, Joel?
They are Fornost, Tharbad, Londair, and Tirngorthad.
And also, once Elendil hooked up with his sons, and they were like, "Yeah, we found a place down here too. We're gonna set up a kingdom down
once
there."
they finally met up again
once
and
they
touched
finally met
base.
up again. They actually split up the Palantiri to help them communicate across their kingdoms,
which is perfect.
Perfection.
So Elendil takes 3. And he puts them in 3 different locations, obviously. The Tower of Elostrion.
Elostrion, yeah, I think that's how you say it.
The Tower of Elostrion.
And this is in that the hills known as Emin Baraid, which we talked about. I don't think we talked about this in the episode, but when we were going over the episode, the Gilgalad episode, we talked about how those towers were actually built by Gilgalad for Elendil, his friend.
Yeah, so we're talking about basically the towers and some of the settlements built along the west coast in Lindon.
Yeah.
Near the havens.
And that stone actually only gazed west over the sea, toward the Master Stone, which was in the Tower of Avalone in Tol Eressëa.
There was also the Anuminos Stone, which sat in the city of Elendil, which is the capital of Arnor.
And of course, the Amansul Stone, which was set in the Watchtower of Amansul, which was later the ruined version of it, is called Weathertop.
Mm-hmm.
And you might notice that from Lord of the Rings, where Frodo gets stabbed there.
Stab, stab.
Stab, stab, stab.
Yeah, there used to be a seeing stone there, which is pretty cool.
And then each of Isildur and Anarion, they each get 2. And they put them throughout the Southern Kingdom. Where do they put them, Joel?
So his sons, Isildur and Anarion, they take their 4 stones and they put them in Anor, in Minas Anor. So there's an Anor stone. They put one in Osgiliath, the capital. They put one in Orthanc, which is pretty cool, up in Isengard. And then there's also the Minas Ithil stone, which later becomes
key.
Very key.
Yeah.
Yes. So now that they've got their kingdoms established, let's get into a little bit of their history.
Yeah, well, all this setting up kingdoms and prospering and having a good time and being thankful that you're alive. While all that's happening, Sauron, he survived the downfall of Numenor, and he made his way back to Mordor.
Yeah, Sauron was not idle, and they don't know that he's still alive. They consider him gone with Numenor.
Yeah. Until, so he moves back to Mordor and plots his revenge, and they don't know he's there until this moment, which this excerpt talks about.
Now Sauron prepared war against the Eldar and the men of Westernesse, and the fires of the mountain were awakened again. Wherefore, seeing the smoke of Orodruin from afar, and perceiving that Sauron had returned, the Númenóreans named that mountain anew Amon Amarth, which is Mount Doom. And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Númenor.
So I got to interject a sidebar here.
Oh, yeah.
So I see a lot of memes on the internet making fun of Tolkien for naming things like Mount Doom. They're like, he has all these crazy names for everything except for Mount Doom. Well, here's the thing, guys. Listen up. Mount Doom is the Westron translation of Amun Amarth, which is a much cooler name, which means Mount Doom. And then there's also the original Elvish name Orodruin, which means Fire Mountain, right?
Orodruin.
So, he named it 3 different things. We just know it by Mount Doom because it's a translation of,
Yeah.
Tolkien was really creative.
Yeah. He's a creative guy.
So fuck all you guys.
So, in the year 3428 of the Second Age, Sauron launches a surprise attack against the Númenórean kingdoms. This is the first time they've seen him.
Yeah, he hoped to destroy the kingdoms before their power was fully established.
He captured Minas Ithil and drove out Isildur, who fled by ship to Arnor.
But then little bro Anarion was able to hold the enemy back at Osgiliath and defend that city from them.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's an easy city to defend, but he did it.
And he's the little brother.
So, 2 years later, in the year 3430, in response to Sauron's sudden resurgence, High King Elendil and High King Gilgalad form an alliance. These High Kings agreed to extend their alliance to King Durin IV of the Longbeards, King Orfer of the Greenwood Elves, and King Amdir of the Lorien Elves.
And together the kings decide to raise a great host in a balls-out attempt to vanquish Sauron once and for all, known as
The Last Alliance.
And for more about that, see Joel's magnum opus episode
Thank you.
41, The Last Alliance of Elves and Men. I listened to that episode just for funsies. I love it.
I'm pretty proud of that one. But for now, so we're going to go over The Last Alliance, but we're going to try to keep it kind of tied to Elendil.
Yeah.
So, The Last Alliance. Let's start off with a quick excerpt about this.
Now Elendil and Gilgalad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one if they did not unite against him. Therefore they made that league which is called the Last Alliance, and they marched east into Middle-earth, gathering a great host of elves and men. It is said that the host that was assembled was fairer and more splendid in arms than any that has been seen in Middle-earth, and none greater has been mustered since the host of the Valar went against Thangor Rodrim. Badass. So yeah, this is some cool shit.
So like we've mentioned in previous episodes, because Elendil and Gil-galad took the initiative here to start first, they had the luxury of time to prepare for the battle.
Yeah. Most of the time Sauron is the aggressor.
Most of the time Sauron is the one that gets the upper hand.
Yeah.
So both the kings began by spending 2 years gathering their own forces. Gil-galad gathered the forces of elves of Eriador and Lindon, and Elendil gathered the forces of Arnor and the remnants of Isildur's forces from Gondor.
And in Second Age 34-31, the forces of Gil-galad and Elendil meet at the Tower of Amun-Sul and march to Rivendell.
In Rivendell, the alliance is joined by the forces of Lord Elrond of Rivendell, and Elrond has the forces of those elves there, and he also takes his place as Gil-galad's second in command for the coming campaign.
Yeah, remember he delays his marriage because of it.
Right. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
So the Alliance spent a further 3 years in Rivendell. While they were there, they were just more or less forging armor and weapons, training, and strategizing.
This is when Rivendell gets its nickname, the Great Forge. And in Second Age 34-34, the Alliance left Rivendell and traveled eastward across the Misty Mountains.
So in the Vale of Anduin, on the other side, the Alliance kind of regroups and is joined by the Sylvan forces of Amdir of Lothlorien and Orifer of Greenwood the Great.
Amdir gathered the forces of the Sylvan Galadrim in Lothlorien. Orifer gathered the forces of Sylvan elves of Greenwood the Great.
However, something that needs to be noted is that neither Amdir nor Orifer's hosts would take Gil-galad, High King Gil-galad, as their leader.
Yeah, old beef.
There's some old beef there between the Sylvan elves and the High Elves.
But after regrouping, the Alliance headed south along the east bank of the Anduin and rendezvoused with the forces of Durin IV of Khazad-dûm, and of course Anarion, who's down there holding down the motherfucking fort.
Yeah, he's been holding shit down this whole time. He's been, basically holding down the fort while everyone takes the time gathering their forces.
Hero of Gondor, Anarion.
I think he's pretty underrated.
I do too.
Yeah, so Anarion had gathered the remaining forces of Gondor, who were more or less holding the fort down, and Durin IV gathered the forces of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. It said that few dwarves fought on either side, but there were dwarves on both sides during this battle.
Now fully gathered, the complete alliance marches south to meet Sauron's defenses at Mordor.
And on the southward journey, the Alliance reaches a recently devastated region that becomes known as the Brown Lands.
Yeah, at some point between SA 34-31 and 34-34, Sauron had sent his army north and slaughtered the Entwives and destroyed the land in an attempt to hinder or just straight up intimidate the Alliance.
Which I wouldn't say it hindered them much, but I would find that very intimidating.
Yes.
And in that famous year, 34-34, the Alliance meets Sauron's forces for the first time and begins the most decisive battle of the war, the Battle of Dagorlad.
Yeah. Sauron's host was comprised of many different forces. Speed Round, Joel, Easterlings, Southrons, Black Númenóreans.
Dwarves, orcs and goblins, trolls, and other unnamed beasts.
Yeah, the Battle of Dagorlad was a shit show in the beginning because there was some contention between the hosts of the Eldar, which we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And, they refused the command of High King Gil-galad.
Yeah, those Sylvan elves, they wouldn't follow the commands. So this almost proved disastrous. It actually killed off a lot of those elves.
Most of them died, yeah.
Most of them died. But eventually, Elendil and Gil-galad regained control of the situation, and they went together into battle, and they did gain the upper hand.
Yeah. It took months, and there were heavy losses, but they did, like Joel said, gain the upper hand, and they breached the Black Gates themselves.
Which I can imagine must have been a pretty fucking crazy scene, because the Black Gates in my mind are always just like this impenetrable force. Like, I'd love to see that scene.
Oh yeah, I wonder how they did it.
The famed weapon of Gil-galad at this time was a spear named Aiglos, which meant snow point or snowthorn. It was a pretty cool, pretty badass weapon. And the famed weapon of Elendil, that was his sword Narsil.
And that, of course, means red and white flame in Quenya, and it was made by Telkar of Norgod in the First Age.
Badass. Super badass.
Yeah. It was passed down to the Dúnedain, and it became one of the heirs of the Lords of Andúnier, or the Kings of Númenor, and then later the Lords of Andúnier.
Mm-hmm.
For more on Narsil, see previous episode 46, Artifact Swords. We get into a little bit in there.
God, I feel like we're just constantly referencing. We've done so many episodes now. This is our 50th. We're just constantly referencing previous episodes.
Yeah, guys, let's take a moment out to realize that this is our 50th episode. Yay!
Woo!
Number 50. We already planned, we talked about planning our 100th episode, guys, so we're
Believe me, we are not done.
we're not going anywhere.
There's a lot left. Yes. So, back to it. The sword Narsil. We have a quick excerpt about this. The host of Gil-galad and Elendil had the victory, for the might of the elves was still great in those days, and the Númenóreans were strong and tall, and terrible in their wrath. Against Aeglos the spear of Gil-galad none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled the orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and the moon, and it was named Narsil. Hell yeah, I just imagine that shining sword just up and down, just swinging. And
it's times like these when I wish we live stream, because like as Joel's reading, because I'm so psyched about these fucking excerpts sometimes, as Joel's reading them, I'm just literally air guitaring over here like. After breaching the Black Gates, the Alliance successfully drove Sauron's forces back and to the fortress of Barad-dûr.
Yeah, so the remaining forces of Gil-galad, Elendil, Thranduil, and Thranduil's leading the Sylvan Elves now.
Yep.
And Durin the Fourth, they all camped out on the plains of Gorgoroth, which must have been kind of shitty. And they prepared. It's not a good place. It's not like a campground, man. It's not a family campground. No. Like the plains of Gorgoroth are pretty shitty. Like it's all oily water and
does it
black
mean
stones.
Like terror plains or something like
that? Yeah. But that's where they're camping while they prepare for the siege of Barad-dûr.
Come camp at Gorgoroth National Park.
We've got.
See wild orcs, see oily streams, see mountains of fire.
See the world's darkest stones.
See utter desolation, Gorgoroth State Park. Visit now, www.gorgorothstatepark.com.
GorgorothStatePark.com.
All right, a little bit off topic there. I just really like the idea of camping there. I mean, I hate the idea of camping there.
Yeah. Okay, so the Siege of Barad-dûr, it actually starts in the year 3434, where so many of these things are happening, and it continues for 7 more years.
7 years.
And though Sauron was confined within his tower, he was not without power during the siege.
Yeah, the Alliance endured seemingly endless numbers of arrows, rocks, and flaming missiles, as well as regular counterattacks from Sauron's orcs.
Yeah, so the Alliance took many casualties in these years. In the year 3440, Elendil's second son, King Anarion of Gondor, was actually killed when his helmet was crushed by a stone that was hurled from Barad-dûr.
Yeah, y'all. Pour one out, put one up for Anarion, our boy.
That's pretty metal.
Yeah. 1 year later, in 3441, the siege became so intense that Sauron himself emerged and joined a counterattack that broke the Alliance's lines.
Yeah, if that's a testament to how strong Sauron's power is. They've been doing the siege for like 7 years now.
7 years now.
And all it took was Sauron, and they just busted through the Alliance.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sauron gained ground and actually pushed the Alliance back all the way to the slopes of Mount Doom, which is a pretty good ways. And we've got an excerpt about this here.
But at the last the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they were both slain, and the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But yeah, like we heard in that excerpt, they fought in single combat on the slopes of Mount Doom. It's Sauron, Gil-galad, and Elendil.
Yeah, and if you want to see a pretty badass interpretation of this, look no further than the prologue of the Lord of the Rings. Granted, we don't get to see
the battle all that much.
The battle with Elendil and Isildur and Gil-galad.
It ends pretty quickly.
But it ends pretty quickly. But it's still pretty cool, just like...
for atmosphere.
Yeah. You're on the slopes of Mount Doom, and it's like this final desperate battle. Mm-hmm. This is the end of the Alliance.
Yeah, dude. I'd imagine, too, like, this scene could have been so cool, because it was like, you had Gil-galad, Elendil, and Sauron going at it in the middle, and then on the outskirts you had Isildur, I imagine, keeping the orcs off of them.
Right.
And then Elrond and fucking
Círdan's there.
keeping the orcs off of. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you just have this huge circle, I imagine. It's like the bloodiest, most brutal fucking battle.
I imagine this is like one of the most ultimate boss fights of all time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously Fingolfin versus Melkor, I mean, that's fucking great. But, I mean, there's been so much that we've been talking about in this episode that led up to this fight. It would just be so cool to see that.
Yeah. Dude, Elendil's 8 feet tall, too. Sauron is, 9 feet tall?
And there's just so many main characters. Elendil, Isildur, Gil-galad, Círdan, Elrond. Like,
the ghost
so many people here.
The ghost of Anarion. Technically, Thranduil's there, too.
Yeah, Thranduil's there somewhere, too. Like, anyway. So, this battle with Sauron. Sauron is obviously much more powerful than Gil-galad or Elendil or Elrond or Círdan or Isildur or anybody.
But any number of them combined gets the trick done.
There you go, yeah. So ultimately Gil-galad is killed first when Sauron scorches his fucking face off with his hand, which we've already talked about how fucking gnarly and metal that is. And nearby Elrond, Círdan, and Isildur are just watching helplessly. So we've got to throw out an excerpt about this scene.
Yeah, this is what Elrond said about it at the Council of Elrond.
I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orodruin. It was Gil-galad, Elven King, and Elendil of Westernesse, who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed where Gil-galad died, and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him. But Sauron himself was overthrown, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand with the hilt shard of his father's sword, and took it for his own.
Yeah, so ultimately with this fight, so ends the last of the High Kings of the Noldor. Never again in Middle-earth was there a High King of the Noldor.
Yeah, so that was a very sad ending. But we're talking today about the High Kings of the Dúnedain.
Yeah, and it's also the death of the first High King of the Dúnedain in Middle-earth. The High Kingship is passed down to Isildur.
Yeah, there's also the death of the greatest warrior of the Dúnedain.
Yeah, period.
8
foot tall, Elendil the Tall.
A motherfucker.
A true motherfucker.
Toe-to-toe with Sauron.
Yeah. So I imagine Narsil, so he's 8 feet tall. So I imagine Narsil is a really long sword.
It would have to, because I know that your sword is supposed to be basically proportional to your height.
Yeah. And Aragorn is 6'4". So Aragorn wielding that sword must have been like fucking William Wallace with the claymore. Like, it must have been fucking terrifying.
Well, technically they did reforge it in...
But they didn't make it shorter. Are you kidding me?
Maybe they took out one of those shards and just...
How pissed off would you be? How pissed off would you be as Aragorn? They like give it back to it. It's shorter. Yo, dude. I mean,
this shard we didn't use.
Like, this is really cool, but I mean, this sword's a lot shorter. Like, I'm not saying I'm like compensating for anything or anything like that, but like, this is a shorter sword than I gave you.
Like, what the fuck happened?
What the fuck happened?
There's a less sword here than when I gave it to you.
Yeah, because it says in the book it broke in 2 pieces, so it's not like in the movie it like shatters.
Yeah, it was like shards.
Yeah.
But yes, ultimately, so in that fight with Sauron is the end of High King Elendil.
Yep, and it's also the end of the Last Alliance and the end of the fucking Second Age.
Yeah, it's the end of a lot.
The end of a lot
people
of things.
And things. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Tomb of Elendil. This is a cool story that I knew nothing about.
I hadn't known this either, so this is pretty fun. Check this out, guys.
So Elendil was buried by Isildur at a place called Eilenaer. Is that how you'd say that?
I think so.
Eilenaer. It's considered to be the halfway point between the 2 kingdoms of the Dúnedain.
Okay, so between the north and the south.
Yeah, so it's in the White Mountains somewhere.
Okay, so this was called Amon Anwar, the Hill of Awe, and this place was said to be almost completely silent.
Yeah, and the kings, the kings of the kings of Gondor, and later the stewards of Gondor, they made pilgrimages to this sacred place that they totally kept a secret.
Yeah, super secret. The kings went there when they were seeking wisdom. They also took the heirs there when they were of age.
Yeah, this is really cool. They would take you'd take your son before you're gonna pass the crown to him. You take him up there and you kind of give him a little crash course in being the king, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would tell them also the story of, because they didn't know anything about this place, so they'd tell them the story of the place. Elendil's buried here.
Mm-hmm. The story of Elendil.
Yeah, I imagine this is kind of like National Treasure 2. The Presidential Book of Secrets or whatever.
The secret shit the presidents passed on.
Yeah, this is when they get it, up here at the at Amon Anwar here. So during the decline of the Kingdom of Gondor, Kalinardon was, which is the province that this is located in, was depopulated for a huge number of reasons, which we discussed at length in the Kingdoms of the Dúnedain Part 3, the Gondor episode.
Yeah, so that'll be episode 24. So the oath of Cirion and Eorl the Young actually took place on this spot in the year 2510 of the Third Age.
But at this juncture, it was since he gave Kalinardon to Rohan, it was just no longer part of Gondor. It was gifted to the Eotheid and became the kingdom of Rohan.
Oh.
So Cirion, who he was the steward of Gondor, he's like, well, this isn't Gondor anymore. So Cirion, the steward of Gondor, he took Elendil's remains and put them in the Hallows in Minas Tirith, and there they remain.
So Elendil's ultimate resting place was Minas Tirith.
Yeah, after a while, it spent a little bit of time at a cool place.
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea that the kings go there when they're seeking wisdom.
It kind of reminds me of the Meneltarma.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and they said that the way the forest grew around the mountain, Isildur made this secret road up there.
Oh, cool.
And the way that the trees, you couldn't see the mountain until you got through the trees.
Oh,
and
so
then
it was like a secret mountain.
It was like a secret mountain essentially.
Secret mountain peak.
And the trees, the way they were, it would muffle all the noise, so it was completely silent at the top.
So a really
of it.
Cool acoustic shadow.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really fun. Yeah, so the tomb of Elendil is a pretty cool place.
Yeah.
Even though he's not there anymore.
So let's talk a little bit about the character of Elendil. And I say he's the best of the best, and here's why. One word, Joel.
Okay.
Humility. So some of the reasons why he's a humble guy. And that's, he was always one of the faithful. He was proud to be Dúnedain, but at no, he thought they were mighty among the children of Iluvatar, but at never any point did he think they were greater or knew more than the Eldar of the Valar.
Yeah, he did have a lot of respect. He also came to Middle-earth as a refugee and adopted it as his new home. He eventually gave the lives of many of his people and his own life to protect this new land from evil.
Yeah, just like so many other immigrants throughout history.
Right.
Immigration is good.
Me and Danny were actually just talking before this episode. We were reading a story, an article about some veterans who are spending their Veterans Day in Mexico because they were deported.
Yeah, super
which
fun.
Is pretty fucked up.
It's always the newest members of the country that'll they're not even there for 100 years yet, and a good portion of their population and their king die. They give their lives to protect their new country that they adopted.
You're talking about Elendil now, yeah. Yeah,
Elendil and so many other people throughout history is the point I'm trying to make. It's the immigrant story is what I'm saying. But also let's talk about Aragorn. But you didn't think we'd talk about him in this episode. Aragorn being Elendil Part 2, essentially.
Yeah, so it might be kind of strange we're talking about Aragorn during the Elendil episode, but Aragorn kind of completes the story of Elendil.
Right. And it goes without saying that Aragorn is one of the greatest characters in The Lord of the Rings.
Definitely.
And virtually all the characteristics that we love about Aragorn were traits that were displayed by his ancestor, Elendil, 39 generations removed.
Yeah, his ability to lead in times of war, strife, or peace.
Yeah, the prowess in battle, just the sheer strength of the motherfucker.
And his obligation to protect the weak.
Yeah, and we see this is evident at the Council of Elrond. Aragorn talks about how the job of protecting the Northern Kingdom, the Old North Kingdom, is a thankless job done by the Dúnedain of the North.
Got a quick excerpt about that there, because why not?
Because why not? Yet we would not have it otherwise. If simple folk are free from care and fear, simple they will be, and we must be secret to keep them so. That has been the task of my kindred while the years have lengthened and the grass has grown.
Yeah, really, that's been their task since Elendil made it so.
Yeah, when he took that oath.
Yeah.
To protect Middle-earth to whatever end, till the end of the world.
And that's about everything we've got for you today on High King Elendil. I'd say one of the most important High Kings, especially when you're talking about High Kings of the Dúnedain.
Yeah. I love Elendil. He's a great character. And then, him reflected in Aragorn is also great.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love Aragorn, too.
It is a really cool concept. But that's about all we've got for you today, guys. This has been KOT Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Follow us on social media. Follow us on Twitter at KOT Podcast. If you want to follow me, I'm at Danny J. That's JAYKOT. Follow us on Facebook.
Yeah, go ahead. www.facebook.com/official Keep On Tolkien. Also, feel free to join the KOT Talk group that we've got there. It's just a lot of us, the listeners and such, asking questions and discussing things and sharing memes and things. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Also, follow us on Instagram at at Keep On Tolkien Podcast. Subscribe on SoundCloud or iTunes, and also give us a little bit of a rate and review on whatever site you like.
Yeah, rate, maybe send us a comment. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, and by subscribing on SoundCloud or iTunes, you can keep up to date on new episodes and, automatic downloads. Very cool.
We also want to throw out a big thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. If you're interested in checking out the Patreon, go to www.patreon.com/KOT podcast. Subscribe and help support us.
Yeah, think of it as like a little tip jar. If you like the show, if you think we deserve a little bit, you want to say thank you, throw in a tip jar. And also you can also cancel your subscription at any time. So like if things get too bad or financially, you don't have to commit.
No worries. Yeah, we're humans. We run through these same problems.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, KOT podcast is 100% do it yourself. It's a DIY podcast, so it's all still coming out of pocket. So any donations really do help us a lot. Just bring the same quality of content to you guys that you expect.
Yeah, and subscribing can also unlock some super cool exclusive content, which is always not safe for work. And yeah, we've been talking about revamping our Patreon a little bit, and we're gonna work on some new fun materials for you. It's more like we figure you guys you like us. At least that's what you tell us.
It seems. I mean, if you're listening to episode 50, there must be something you enjoy.
Something keeping you here. And so we decided to do some things where you can just kind of get to know us a little bit more. We talk about our favorite things like our movies and books and stuff like that, just to get to know us a little bit more if you're interested in that.
But ultimately, that's what we've got for you today, guys.
Yeah. I am Danny J.
And I am Joel N. And as always, guys,
keep on Tolkien. Array and Tuluva.